Venerable ones, get to know the one who plays with these configurations. He is the original source of all the Buddhas. Knowing him wherever you are is home. Your physical body, formed by the four elements, cannot understand the Dharma you are listening to, nor can your spleen, stomach, liver, or gall, nor can the empty space, who then can understand the Dharma and listen to it. The one here before your very eyes, brilliantly clear and shining without any form. There he is who can understand the Dharma you are listening to. If you can really grasp this, you are not different from the Buddhas and patriarchs. Ceaselessly, he is right here, conspicuously present. But when passions arise, wisdom is disrupted and the body separates from the changing pictures. This is the cause of transmigration in the three worlds with its concomitant suffering. But as I see it, there is nothing that is not profound, nothing that is not deliverance. So this is a passage from the Rinzai Roku, the record of Rinzai. Chinese name is Lin Chi. Rinzai is the Japanese name. He lived in the 9th century, towards the end of the Tang dynasty, which ran from the 6th to the 9th centuries. It was considered a great flowering of Zen, and he was one of the great Zen masters of that particular aeon, or of that particular dynasty, sorry. We have talked about Master Rinzai on several occasions before and told his story, etc., how he started off in the Tendai school, a scripture school, and then moved over to train under Master Obaku, who held the Zen lineage at that time. And we see that Rinzai himself, who was very erudite, well studied, but felt that there was something missing, and so was really looking for a breakthrough. And under Master Obaku, he got it, or he arrived at that breakthrough. And he developed a very frank and very direct style. And what we have here in this quite a short passage really is, if you like, a distillation of the essence of not only his own teaching, but also the teaching of the Buddha. So what we have here is really, as I say, a distillation to the very essence. Master Rinzai is pointing to the very heart of the Buddha's own awakening. Get to know the one who plays with these configurations. So this is obviously a follow-on from what's gone before the earlier part of this same message, this same sermon. And he's been talking about the mental configurations. And mental configurations, the term in Sanskrit is samskaras. They form one of what's known as the 5 skandhas. And the 5 skandhas was a teaching the Buddha used as an object of meditation for his disciples to use to analyze consciousness. Because if we just sitting here whether we're in meditation, on the cushion or on our seat, or whether in meditation, in activity, daily life practice, what's sometimes called mindfulness, then really we can see that the objects of consciousness fall into 2 broad categories. One, physical objects, such as sounds, sights, tastes, smells, tactile sensations. These are known as rupa. And then there are 4 types of mental object. The first 2 being feeling sensation, which are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The second is perception. The third are the samskaras, the mental configurations. And the fourth is sense consciousness, vijnana, as it's called. So this fourth one, samskaras, actually, perhaps a better translation, are mental volitional activities. These are volitional meaning based on desire, based on the desire to attain a particular end. And that's very important because we're not just talking about, hunger and then wanting food, or thirst and wanting, water to assuage it. We're talking about a conscious and deliberate attempt to try and repeat pleasant sensations and a conscious and deliberate attempt to avoid unpleasant or hurtful sensations, which, obviously appears perfectly rational to do. But the problem is that in the process of doing that, there gets formulated into consciousness a sense of a self to whom these things happen, that is, experiencing pleasant or unpleasant, and also, as the other side of that appearance of a self, is an agent that wishes to pursue what is pleasant and escape from what is unpleasant. And this becomes habituated. And in fact, according to the Buddha's teachings, this is habituated in his Four Noble Truths, the cause of suffering, and the second noble truth, is attachment to this appearance of a self, which fundamentally the Buddha said was a false. It was actually a false consciousness. It's not a true object. It's not a real self that is separate. It is itself being produced by what are known as the passions of greed, hatred, and delusion. So the notion of a self and the passions are intimately codependent. The passions themselves fortify and feed the notion of the self, my desires, what I must have, literally from the point of when I get up in the morning and I go to the fridge, I'm in a hurry to go to work. I open the fridge door. I've just boiled the kettle, made my coffee. I'd like to have milk with it, and there's no milk there. And how many times have I told my other half, the kids, the flatmates, whoever it is, they're so selfish. They know I'm in a hurry in the morning, and they do this all the time. And I, go out the door now in a really bad mood, which affects me, for perhaps the morning. And maybe that leads to a row later, who knows? So everything becomes very polarized in this way. Once we have a self, we have another, and that other is usually another self as well. And, we can begin to fight it out. And, whether this is done on an individual level, whether this is done on a collective level, as we see going on very much in our world at the moment, this shape of reality, which is not a reality, actually, it's a delusion. The Buddha says this isn't actually the true nature of things. This isn't real reality. What we think of as reality is actually very much a mishmash. It's very much through a glass darkly. And because it's through a glass darkly, we continue to make mistakes and to compound the error through one way or another. And so the Buddha gave us these five skandhas, this rupa, and then these four mental objects, including the samskaras, the mental configurations, to begin to analyze. So, and in that process of seeing consciousness arising and passing away in these categories of the five skandhas, the question that is constantly being asked is there a permanent separate self in any of these appearances? And the answer is no. And what we discover, of course, is that these phenomena that are flowing through these five skandhas that we can, bear witness to, because that's what consciousness is. It means to know. That we bear witness, that is being borne witness to, actually is a process. It's not like an enclosed separate self that's ordering things about. It's actually a process. And so this separateness produces two things. One is that it produces a sense of alienation, because if I am separate from everything, then I am alien to it. I don't actually belong. A separate self doesn't belong to the landscape. And I always remember, and this is, a lot of people talk now about alienation and existential angst, etc. That's, worry and anxiety. This is something that's very prevalent in our world. And this, Buddhistically, even the Buddha's diagnosis, basically stems from a strong sense of myself as a separate being and an autonomous and independent being, fundamentally, which is something that, again, we need to be a little bit careful in how we interpret this, because that's not to say that there isn't autonomy. There is autonomy. However, there isn't separateness either. So, so what we have, therefore, is suffering that is caused by through the sense of alienation, and the result of that is a sense of homelessness. And this is what Master Rinzai is addressing when he says, "Get to know the one who plays with these configurations. He is the original source of all the Buddhas. Knowing him, wherever you are, is home." And so what he means by that is that when we think that these mental configurations rule the roost, when we think that one of these mental configurations called me, I, and myself is ruling the roost and is in charge, when actually I am simply a production of this process, which is really in charge, which is quite outside myself, then I'm never at home. And the reason I'm never at home is that I'm constantly desiring something to be somewhere else. This feeling of the grass always must be greener on the other side. The world must be made a better place because it's not good enough for me. And obviously by me, I mean everyone else as well, who I think wants the same thing as me. Of course they don't. And that's half the problem, and why we end up in conflict so quickly. But he talks about who is the original, this one who is the original source of all the Buddhas. Well, Master Haggiag, a later Zen master, Japanese of the 18th century, he said something similar when he spoke, when he said, "See the puppets prancing on the stage. Look behind for him who pulls the strings. See the puppets prancing on the stage. Look behind for him who pulls the strings." And Rinzai here says, get to know the one who plays with these configurations. So what Master Rinzai is implying is that the puppet is not pulling his own strings, puppet being I, of course. So I may think that I hold my views and I have my wants and that I choose all these things, but actually we very quickly see that that is not the case at all. And even the Buddha gave a very good analogy for this when he talked about a king and his army. And he said, if you have a king and he has an army and he tells the army to march to the south, and the army instead march to the east, and then he tells the army to march north and instead they march to the west, and then he tells them to march to the west and they stay exactly where they are. Well, you can't really call him much of a king because he can't even command his own army. And in fact, maybe that army isn't his, maybe they're working unto a different rule, to a different power, so to speak, and that king is a false king. And that king, of course, is I, again. I like to think that I'm making the choices that run my own life, but he said, actually, the picture is far more complicated than that. And as we know, neuroscience these days also makes that point that a lot of our so-called conscious choices are actually unconsciously made and then fed through to appear to consciousness, to make consciousness appear to be the one in charge, actually making these choices, but that is not the case. And that's quite something because, working with the skandhas, particularly with the mental configurations, if you ask yourself, why do you hold the ideological opinions that you hold? Why do you hold the aesthetic opinions that you hold? You may think, well, because I choose to do so. But actually, it doesn't take long to see that, a lot of these things come from a whole mishmash. It comes from temperament, comes from upbringing, comes from, experiences that we've had whilst we've been alive as well. How much can we actually call our own? How much can I really call mine? And the point is, in the end, that although these things can be modified, we cannot escape the process. Everything works within this process of coming to be and ceasing to be, coming to be and ceasing to be, through cause and effect, cause and effect. This is why karma is so important in the teaching of the Buddha. But what Master Rinzai is saying is that through this process, through this working, through this type of analysis, through this seeing clearly, we begin to see that this self is a false self, and actually what we are truly, sort of slightly hesitate to call it a true self, although it is possible to refer to this as perhaps a greater being or greater phenomenon, very loosely, is that's actually what our true nature is, and that we've mistaken our nature falsely for this I, when actually this true nature is the process of life itself. And again, I like to always, recount one of the last things my own late teacher, Venerable Myokyo-ni, said before she died. She said, forms come and go. Those are the puppets prancing on the stage. Forms come and go, because even desire is just a mental configurations. These forms just come and go, she says, even referring to her own body. But, she said, that life, meaning life with a capital L, this impetus, this great process of coming to be and ceasing to be, that goes on. And this is why in Zen, the contemplation of nature is so important. When we contemplate nature, what do we see? We see, spring, then moves into summer, and then transforms into autumn, and then slows and cools into winter. And then the temperature increases, the light returns, as we're beginning to see now at the end of January. And sure enough, the snowdrops are coming up. In some cases, they're already up. The crocuses will be up in a few weeks, and so on. And suddenly, spring, the new greens of spring, the leaves are shooting on the trees as well. So life is always going on. It always does. But yes, the forms come and go. The forms come and go. And if I cling to one of those forms, if I cling to my form as last year's leaf, then of course the idea of falling in autumn terrifies me. But if we recognize that in fact we're actually just the manifestation of this process through forms, then the feeling becomes something different. Anyway, Master Rinzai goes on. Your physical body, formed by the 4 elements, cannot understand the Dharma you are listening to, nor can your spleen, stomach, liver, or gall, nor can the empty space, who then can understand the Dharma and can listen to it. Well, this is a good point, isn't it? Because he points to all the different organs and he's saying, well, where are you? Because obviously someone right now is speaking and someone right now is hearing, and not only hearing, but understanding these words. And again, just keeping in mind that that parable of the Buddha about the king who can command the army or not, as in that case. If I was to say, well, who is hearing and understanding these words that I'm speaking, presuming that you can understand English, no doubt you'll probably think, well, I am. Obviously, I'm hearing. I am understanding these words. Well, okay, if you're hearing and understanding these words, then switch that off. Stop hearing or stop understanding these words. Just hear these words not as words of intelligible English, but as sounds that are just emanating from my mouth, as if you were hearing a creature in the forest that you'd never seen before, uttering some strange howl or bark or jabber or shriek or shrill. You just hear it as a sound. You don't hear it as meaningful words. Is it possible to switch off this faculty of understanding these words? Can you just hear these words now as pure sound? Can you command them? Can you command the function of understanding? And what about the function of hearing? Can you stop yourself hearing these words? Well, I'm going to guess that probably not. In fact, almost certainly you will not be able to do it. Certainly you will not be able to do it. Why? Because you and I are the king who cannot command this army of functionings. Something else does. But who is it? Is it the spleen? Is it the lung? Is it the liver? Is it the eye? No, it's not. Because actually, even without some of those things, this understanding still takes place. What he's pointing to is this, what's called pure consciousness, that there's this understanding is simply functioning in and of itself, and it has nothing to do with I. And he goes on to talk about this, this one. He says, the one here before your very eyes, brilliantly clear and shining without any form. And that without any form is really important, because something that doesn't have a form of its own can assume any form. So if you think of it, for example, if you pour water into a vessel, such as a plastic tumbler, and you put that into the freezer and you freeze it, it turns into ice. Now, you can take that ice out. You maybe, let's say you just are able to extract the ice from the tumbler in one piece. You can't then just put that ice into another vessel of a different shape. But if you allowed it to melt, you could quite comfortably pour that water now, that liquid, from one vessel into another, and it will quite naturally adapt to it. This is what Master Rinzai means. That because something doesn't have a solid, because it doesn't have its own form, and liquid water doesn't have its own form, it's able to transform itself into any shape and take on the shape of any vessel into which it is poured. And so it is with this one as well. And that's important, because this consciousness, this one that knows and this one that functions, can adapt. It can adapt as long as it doesn't get infected with the notion that, for example, that it can't do something. So, for example, I know, for example, if I have to sit a session, if I have to sit a long period of time with lots of zazen, the thought of that might fill me with, a certain amount of horror, particularly if I've not done it before. Maybe I'm a regular sitter at home. I sit for an hour, but I've never done anything quite like this. And I remember, in fact, the first time I did go on a session, that's exactly what did happen. And I remember being very nervous and anxious about whether I would last, because we were going away for 5 days, so it wasn't like I could just, get up and go home. I was, once I'd set off, I was committed to it. And of course, in the end, it happened. It was hard. It was a very hard 5 days, I have to say. And there were times when I really did want to get up, and go. But I knew I couldn't. And so I had to sit it out. What I was trapped in was an awful lot of beliefs about what I could or could not do. That was the stuckness. That was the thing that said, no, I can't do this. But because the body can do this, because the body could sit there, even with a certain amount of pain, physical pain, and also psychological discomfort as well, sort of, doled on top of that. Eventually, all that goes. And the time passes, and the sitting comes to an end, and there's a break, and there's a meal, and you go for a walk, and there's bed, and so forth, and then there's the next day. And one feels a little bit better after a night's sleep. So suddenly we find that the strength is there. And I never realized it. I could do these things, or it was possible to do these things. Actually, to be strict about this, I didn't think I could, but something else could and did. And that's where we really discover the great strength that lies in it. The one here before your very eyes, brilliantly clear and shining without any form, there he is who understands the Dharma you are listening to. If you can really grasp this, you are not different from Buddhas and patriarchs. In other words, this is the insight of the Buddha himself. Ceaselessly, he is right here, conspicuously present. And there's a little note here, which if you look in the back of the book, that conspicuously present, it says, as in, meaning as in terms of being present, as a presence. So in other words, one cannot know something without a form. It remains a mystery, but one can live in the presence of that mystery, knowing that it is always there, and that one is never alone. And that is greatly reassuring and a great stimulator of faith as well, because it takes faith to give yourself into that mystery, which I really don't want to do. I want certainty, but actually at roots, it's a mystery. He goes on finally. But when passions arise, wisdom is disrupted and the body separates from the changing pictures. What this means is that those images, those changing pictures, which are the mental configurations, they are taken as separate. In other words, we fall into this erroneous view of a separate I, instead of realizing that in fact both the pictures and the body arise from the same essence, and that essence is preserved and intact always, even when I fall into delusion. This is the cause of transmigration in the three worlds. The three worlds is simply another way of talking about samsara, or the six realms on the wheel of life, with its concomitant suffering. But as I see it, there is nothing that is not profound, nothing that is not deliverance. So in other words, it is not that things are not awake, or that things are not profound, or that the reality is in any way actually hidden. It is just that the eyes are not at this point able to see it because of the affliction of consciousness by this delusion of a separate I. So hopefully that brings over, there's a lot of material in here and we've really just skated over it quite quickly. But hopefully that gives a real sense of the profundity of really this quite short passage from Master Rinzai. So we thank him and wish him well for his anniversary, and thank you for listening.